The desert doesn't care if you're a hunter or the hunted. It only asks one question: what will you do when the blood on your hands isn't from an animal? The sun had bled into the horizon, painting the Arizona scrubland in hues of rust and ash as I trudged back toward camp, my rifle slung over one shoulder, the weight of 2 dead jackrabbits swinging from my belt. Dust clung to my boots like dried sweat, and the dry wind carried the scent of sagebrush and something else, something metallic, primal. I'd come out here for meat, plain and simple. Winter was coming, and my larder was bare. My horse, Old Buck, snorted behind me, his hooves kicking up little puffs of earth with each step. I didn't hear the shot until it echoed off the distant buttes, a single, sharp crack that froze me mid-stride. My hand flew to my Colt, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Then came the low, guttural moan, not animal, not wind. Human. I crept forward, every sense screaming, every instinct telling me to turn back, to leave whatever lay ahead to the vultures and coyotes. But curiosity is a cruel master, especially when you've spent too long alone with your thoughts. I rounded a crumbling rock formation and saw her. Lying on her back, legs splayed, arms thrown wide like she'd been dropped from the sky. Her buckskin dress was torn, stained crimson across the chest, her face streaked with dirt and something darker. She wasn't moving, not breathing, as far as I could tell. Apache, by the look of her braids, her moccasins, the fringed leather vest clinging to her frame. Barefoot, bare-legged, bare-chested beneath the shredded fabric. A bullet wound pulsed faintly at her collarbone, oozing slow and dark. Behind her, standing like a statue carved from shadow, was a man in a Stetson and duster, rifle still smoking, eyes locked on me. His horse stood calm beside him, as if this were just another day's work. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched me watch her. The air between us felt charged, dangerous. I knew that look, the cold calculation of a man who'd already decided what needed to be done. And now he was waiting for me to decide what I would do. Take her home, or let her die. The words weren't spoken, but they hung in the dusty air like a noose. My fingers twitched on my revolver. My mouth went dry. I'd hunted deer, coyotes, even mountain lions, but never a woman. Never someone who looked so broken, so beautiful, so utterly defenseless. And yet, there was something about her. Something that made my pulse race not with fear, but with something deeper, darker. A pull, a reckoning. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on gravel, and knelt beside her. Her skin was warm, her breath, shallow but there. Alive, barely. I glanced up at the stranger. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. She's not yours, I said, voice rough as sandpaper. He tilted his head, just slightly. She's nobody's now, he replied, and turned his horse away. Do what you will. And then he was gone, swallowed by the twilight haze, leaving me alone with a dying woman and a choice that would change everything. I didn't think, I acted. With trembling hands, I ripped open my canteen and poured water over her wound, not enough to clean it, but enough to shock her system awake. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes dusted with grit, and for a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she gasped, a ragged, wet sound, and her fingers twitched against the dirt. Easy, I murmured, though I doubted she understood English. I tore strips from my shirt, pressing them hard against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. Blood seeped through, hot and sticky, staining my fingers. She groaned again, louder this time, and her body arched slightly before collapsing back. I scooped her up, cradling her against my chest like a child, her head lolling against my shoulder. She weighed less than I expected, all bone and sinew, her skin burning with fever. Old Buck whinnied nervously as I loaded her onto his saddle, securing her with ropes and my coat draped over her. I mounted behind her, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other gripping the reins. Every jostle made her whimper, and I cursed myself for being so clumsy, so unprepared. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't a savior. I was just a damn fool who couldn't walk away from a dying thing. The ride back to my cabin was agony, not for her, I hoped, but for me. Each mile stretched longer than the last, the silence broken only by her labored breathing and the rhythmic clop of Buck's hooves. I kept talking to her, nonsense mostly, about the stars, about the creek behind my shack, about the rabbits I'd caught earlier, as if words could stitch her flesh back together. When we finally reached the cabin, I laid her on my cot, fumbling with bandages and whiskey, praying the alcohol wouldn't kill her faster than the bullet. I cleaned the wound as best I could, stitching it with thread from my sewing kit, my hands shaking so badly I nearly stabbed myself. She didn't flinch, didn't cry out, just stared at the ceiling with glassy eyes, as if watching something only she could see. I boiled water, soaked rags, wiped her brow, whispered promises I didn't know if I could keep. "You're gonna live," I told her, over and over, like a prayer. "You're gonna live." By dawn, her fever broke. She slept deeply, her breathing steady. I sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, wondering who she was, why she was out there alone, and who that man was who left her to die. I thought about the rifle in his hands, the way he looked at me, not with hatred, but with something worse, indifference. As if her life meant nothing. As if mine did either. And yet, here I was, risking everything to save her. Why? Because I couldn't bear to be the kind of man who walks away. Because maybe, deep down, I needed saving too. The sun rose, casting golden light across her face, and for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me, not guilt, not pity, but purpose. She was alive, and somehow, that made me feel alive too. But I knew this was only the beginning. The real test wasn't keeping her breathing. It was keeping her safe. From the world. From men like him. From me. Days passed in a hush, broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the wind scraping across the roof beams. She didn't speak, not at first. But she watched. Always watching. Her eyes, dark as obsidian and just as sharp, followed my every move. How I stirred the beans, how I cleaned my rifle, how I avoided looking directly at her when she shifted beneath the blanket. I gave her space, food, water, never forcing, never demanding. I built a screen of hides and old quilts near the fireplace so she could have privacy, though I slept with my back to the door, revolver within reach, just in case. I told myself it was caution. Later, I'd admit it was respect. She healed slowly, fever returning in waves, then receding like the tide. One morning, I found her standing by the window, bare feet on the rough-hewn floorboards, staring out at the mesas. I froze in the doorway, unsure whether to retreat or speak. "You're strong," I finally said. She turned, just slightly, and for the first time, her lips curled, not quite a smile, but something close. She pointed to the horizon, then to the sky, then mimed drawing a bow. "You hunt?" I asked. She nodded once. "Not like me," I said, holding up my rifle. She shook her head slowly and tapped her chest, her way, not mine. That afternoon, she made her first sound, a single word, low and melodic. "Nah." I didn't know what it meant, but I repeated it gently. She looked surprised, then pleased. We began a fragile language of gestures and sounds, of shared meals and silent nights. She showed me how to wrap wounds with yarrow leaves, how to read the clouds before a storm, how to move without noise through the brush. In return, I taught her English words: water, fire, safe. She never asked about the man in the duster. I never asked about her people. Some wounds aren't meant to be spoken about yet. But trust, I learned, doesn't need words. It grows in the quiet, between shared sips of broth, between mended clothes and mended nights. And slowly, without either of us naming it, something began to bloom. Not romance, not yet, but kinship. A bond forged not in conquest, but in survival. And as the days grew shorter and colder, I realized I no longer thought of her as the woman I'd found bleeding in the sand. She was becoming someone I chose to keep. Then came the tracks. 3 sets, wide and deep, circling the cabin like vultures. I spotted them at dawn, just beyond the dry creek bed, boot prints, horse hooves, and the drag mark of something heavy. My blood ran cold. I'd hoped the world would forget us here, tucked between canyon walls and silence. But men like that, they don't forget. They follow blood trails like wolves. I barred the door, doused the fire, and motioned for her to stay quiet. She didn't need telling. She'd already moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters, her body taut as a drawn string. "Riders," I whispered. She nodded, then pointed to the ridge, where a glint of metal caught the sun. A rifle scope. They were watching, waiting. That night, we barely slept. I loaded both barrels of my shotgun, checked my Colt, and laid out extra powder and shot. She sat cross-legged by the hearth, sharpening a bone knife with a stone, her eyes never leaving the door. "Why did they want you?" I asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away. Then she touched her chest, then pointed west, toward the Apache lands. Your people. She shook her head. Not my people, she finally said, voice rough from disuse. My punishment. I stared at her, stunned. You're running from your own. She looked away, jaw tight. I broke law. Spoke against chief. Loved man I shouldn't. Her words were halting, but clear. They cast me out. Hunted me. Those men, they work for bounty hunters hired by my tribe, or by white law. Doesn't matter. Both want me dead. I sat back, heart pounding. Not a victim. A fugitive. And I'd brought her into my home like a stray dog. But the truth was, I didn't care. Law or no law, tribe or no tribe, she was under my roof now. And that meant my protection. They won't take you, I said firmly. She met my gaze, eyes blazing. They will kill you too. Then let them try. We spent the next 2 days preparing, booby-trapping the trail, hiding horses in the ravine, stockpiling water and ammunition. She taught me Apache signals, how to mimic a hawk's cry, how to leave false trails. And in those tense hours, something shifted again. Not just allies, partners, equals. When the first shot rang out at dusk 3 days later, we were ready. The fight was short, brutal, and over before the moon crested the pines. They came at twilight, thinking we'd be unprepared. But we'd been waiting in the rocks above the trail, rifles cold, hearts steady. I took the lead rider with a clean shot to the shoulder, enough to drop him, not kill. She fired next, her aim true, felling the second man's horse. Chaos erupted. The third rider panicked, firing wildly into the brush. I advanced, using the boulders for cover, while she flanked from the left, silent as shadow. One bounty hunter tried to flee, she tripped his horse with a lasso made from my cabin rope, then stood over him with her knife before he could rise. I disarmed the wounded ones, tied their hands with leather thongs, and made them kneel. They were rough men, dirty coats, yellowed teeth, eyes full of contempt. You're harboring a savage, one spat. I backhanded him hard. She's under my protection. You touch her, you answer to me. I took their weapons, their horses, and their bounty papers, burned them all in the fire that night. At dawn, I marched them 10 miles east, left them on the road with water and a warning. Tell anyone you saw her, and I'll hunt you down myself. They believed me. I could see it in their eyes. When I returned, she was waiting on the porch, wrapped in my coat, the morning sun warming her face. Why? She asked simply. Why protect me? I sat beside her, staring at the empty horizon. Because no one deserves to die just for loving the wrong person. She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and placed her hand on mine, rough, warm, real. You are not like other white men, she said. No, I replied. And you're not just a bare Apache woman. She smiled then, truly smiled, and for the first time, I saw peace in her eyes. We didn't speak of leaving. Didn't speak of the future. But as the days turned into weeks, the cabin no longer felt like mine alone. It became ours. Not through vows or law, but through choice. And sometimes, in the stillness of night, when the fire burned low and the coyotes sang in the distance, I'd catch her looking at me, not with fear, not with pity, but with something deeper. Something like home. The desert still doesn't care who hunts or who hides. But sometimes, in the silence between breaths, it lets two lost souls find each other anyway.